What do you see as the biggest science gap related to PFAS? And that will lead nicely into our next session. As we all know, PFAS are often called forever chemicals and represent a significant challenge to us all as we strive to protect human health and the environment from the effects of PFAS. And the enormity of this challenge is exactly why we are thrilled to bring you the next session, which is addressing PFAS through technology. Mitigation methods, monitoring methods to detect and understand PFAS and their impacts, NCLs, dose response dynamics, toxicity, bait and transport, affordability for analysis, long-term impacts to animal and human health. Take about 15 or 20 more seconds to get your answers in if you would like to answer. Lab methods, cost-effective treatment technologies, regulations on only a few compounds when there are many PFAS. Great. Reliable test methods. You guys are so brilliant. Lesser research, short chain, lesser research on short chain PFAS, but we will have to cut it off so we can go ahead and hear from our technical experts with us today. So if we could move to their bio slides. Great. So as I said, this session is about addressing PFAS through technology. And with us today, we have Alice Fulmer and Rosa Gwinn. Alice is a regional liaison for the Water Research Foundation. Her prior role at the Water Research Foundation was as a senior research manager, where her main area of expertise was contaminants of emerging concern, managing research on PFAS, hexavalent chromium, DBPs, EDCs, and risk communication. Dr. Rosa Gwinn is the Global PFAS Technical Lead at AECOM, and with a technical foundation in solving thorny remediation problems over the past 3 decades, Dr. Gwinn recognized the need and chartered AECOM's global initiative to address PFAS in drinking water, wastewater, and the environment. So first, Alice will be presenting an overview of the Water Research Foundation's latest research on PFAS in water, wastewater, and biosolids. And as I turn it over to Alice to begin, I'd like to make sure everyone is on mute, and you may enter any questions you have for Alice in the chat box. And after we hear from both Alice and Rosa, we will pull those questions as time permits and pose them to both speakers. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Let me try to start sharing my screen here. Hopefully this will work. Oh, nope, that's going to show you notes, so I'll just get out of presenter.
It looked like it was showing correctly at first, and then it switched to notes.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing and just start that again. Sorry about that. How are we now?
Perfect.
Great. Well, thank you for that introduction. And thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you today about the research that the Water Research Foundation has ongoing in this area. It was very interesting to hear the results of that poll. Certainly, some of those topics are ones that we agree are important research needs and that I'm looking forward to sharing with you. We have some work ongoing on the short chain PFAS that are so much more difficult to treat, as well as risk communication and biosolids. Just a quick minute on we are what we do. So the Water Research Foundation is a nonprofit research collaborative. We're funded mostly through subscriptions, and most of those subscriptions are water utilities, many of whom are in the Mid-Atlantic region. So thank you all. When we fund that work, all of our projects result in resources that are then made available on our website, and that we do as much as we can to share with you all through events like this one today. So all of the projects I'll talk about, you can find them on our website. Here's the address for that site. And while many of our final reports are limited to our subscribers, many of them that are health related, such as PFAS, are available to the public. And I would encourage you to create an account, whether you're a subscriber or not. You can get access to those resources at the site here. We also, in addition to specific projects, have done our best to try to summarize in topic overviews really high-level information about several topics, one of which is PFAS. So you see a few of the resources that are already available on this slide here. So we've been doing research, we at the Water Research Foundation have been doing research on PFAS for over 10 years, but obviously when the last set of health advisory levels came out, we really stepped up the pace of that research, if you will. Our research covers all types of water, so drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, recycled water, and in the area of PFAS, all various topics such as analytical methods. Originally, we had on our research agenda that we wanted to assess the analytical methods and advance those. Actually, at the time, there was a lot of other work ongoing at EPA and elsewhere to develop methods. And so while now I would say we have more work to do to get those methods there, to advance those methods to the even lower health advisory levels. Really, we've recently been focused more on how do we analyze a broader spectrum of PFAS as opposed to trying to get even lower. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Also some work looking at the sources of PFAS and vulnerabilities, really hotspots, if you will. Behavior, fate, and transport is obviously very important. We know that we have, as depicted on the right there, water cycle, and that these compounds are moved throughout the cycle, not just in water, but can be air as well. And then obviously what we are most known for at the Water Research Foundation is treatment efficacy. So we will see a lot of our work really is focused on treatment and removal, or in some cases, destruction of PFAS. And then one that I've heard a lot of talk about this morning, risk communication strategies. So we do have some past work in this area, but also a new project that I'm going to talk with you about. So here is the full slate of our research projects and resources. We have about 15 ongoing by last count on this area. I realize this is a pretty busy slide, but if we make these available later, these are all active hyperlinks. So this should help you navigate if there are specific projects that are of interest to you. And I will mention that you'll see two at the bottom right of your screen. These two projects are ones that were just funded this year, and which we will be releasing RFPs in the coming, actually in one case next week. The one looking at PFAS residual management options, this one should be coming out next week, and we would love to see volunteers to participate in that project. All of our projects have the opportunity for utilities to participate, as well as I think there's some people that might make some good potential contractors for this project if you're interested in submitting a proposal. So first I mentioned analytical methods. This project here is getting at what I hinted at before, which is the notion that we really need to be able to analyze for more than the 20 to 30 compounds for which we can currently quantify using the EPA methods. So this project came in through what we call our unsolicited program, where we invite people to submit their own ideas as opposed to respond to a request for proposal. And the contractor, a gentleman with the University of Notre Dame, is working with Megan Plumley from Orange County Water District to explore the use of particle-induced gamma ray emission, or PIGE, spectrometry as a rapid and potentially a screening method for PFAS in surface water, recycled water, and groundwater. So we recognize that this isn't going to give you the quantification that's always necessary for example, were to have regulations that we needed to comply with here, but it has been found to have great potential as a screening method. So there is a paper that you saw on that previous slide where some of this work was already published, ES&T last year. And that's where this figure came from here on the right. So just to kind of brief or image there summarizing how they prepared the samples. These are 2-liter samples, which is notable. But the way that the project was conducted, there were split samples analyzed by LCMS-MS, both at Orange County Water District and the University of Notre Dame. And it's important to note that the sample collection and the gravity filtration was done at OCWD. And I mentioned this because they wanted to demonstrate that it was feasible for a utility to do this prep work, if you will. And I should mention too that they ended up actually not just analyzing surface water, recycled water, and groundwaters, but they did look at some treated water and one point source location as well with this method. They were able to see a linear response over a range of 6 spiked water samples and demonstrate accuracy and precision as a screening method. And they were able to validate the method and use it for direct comparison. In general, while these findings are still preliminary, we do expect a report should be coming out fairly soon. We have a draft, I believe. But they did find that they could use this to look at total organic fluorine. And they were able to do that by doing some comparison with the individual measurement methods, as I mentioned before as well. They did do some pre-treatment of samples using Fenton's reagent and adjusting the low pH to avoid fluoride in order to use this in real world samples. The limit of detection that they found was 38 part per trillion with a precision of less than 20%, so that's good. Again, they found that linear response and were able to use it in different types of matrices. So this is very encouraging. Hopefully we'll have a report that we can share with you soon. Let's see, moving on to slides to advance. As I mentioned before, we have a number of projects related to treatment. And this is where we actually already have a couple of projects that we've published in the past. I'm going to highlight a couple of them here just for the sake of time, although certainly there's several that are doing some really great work here. The reason I highlight those two is that this is a table from a past project that you see in the top right corner. And what I think is worth noting here is that if you're just looking at PFOA and PFAS, we're not getting removal with traditional treatment or conventional treatment. As you know, we do see it within FNRO, but we're kind of getting incomplete removal with ion exchange and GAC, which are being touted as some of the best available technologies. And this table starts with the lower chain and low molecular weight compounds at the top and moves down to higher ones. And as someone in the chat alluded to, we just don't get as good removal of these short chain or lower molecular weight compounds. And so that's why we funded a couple of projects here, one of which specifically is titled Investigation of Treatment Alternatives for Short Chain PFAS. We actually funded this project around the same time that we got a grant from the Department of Defense, which was to look at life cycle comparison and evaluation of ex situ treatment technologies for PFAS in groundwater. We have, you'll see a few of the PIs are similar between the two projects, which is great. So they've been able to coordinate really well. These two projects are complementary, and both are wrapping up and hope to have something to report soon. So here you see a little bit more information about the short chain project. It is intended to develop a guidance manual, and it's doing bench, pilot, and full scale of both existing and emerging treatment processes. I'll give some high-level results for both GAC and ion exchange. We had 39 plants participate in this project from 16 different states, both drinking water and reuse. And definitely, they validated what we've seen before, that PFAS removal is dependent upon that PFAS chain link. Interestingly, the empty bed contact time did not have much of an effect on the short chain PFAS removal. And basically, while you might get some PFAS absorbing to the GAC, it then gets basically bumped off or desorbed due to substitution by the long chain PFAS. It also was found, it's also found to be dependent strongly on total organic carbon. And so removing that prior to GAC could extend the life of the GAC. Similarly, ion exchange, the short chain were definitely more challenging to remove than long chain. It really was pretty ineffective for many of the short chain PFAS. The removal efficacy really increased exponentially as the chain length increased. But I should point out that the sulfonic acids were more readily removed than the carboxylic acids. So moving on to the DoD project, like I mentioned before, it is looking more at the life cycle comparison. It wanted to compare some of the more established technologies with the more emerging technologies, which include some of the destructive technologies that I believe Rosa is going to be talking about in her next presentation. So these are things like electrochemical treatment, non-thermal plasma, AORP, etc. So this project is going to be resulting in a decision support. We've had a couple of workshops already for this project. And the tool, as I mentioned, is going to take into consideration cost, but also other stakeholder value. So basically, you'll be able to put in concentrations, treatment objectives, and look at different technologies and how they might or may not be recommended based on your stakeholder value. So it might be that affordability is a top priority for you. It could be that you want to give extra weight to environmental health or public health, et cetera. So there's a few different criteria that you can weight with this decision. Both of these I expect to be out next year. So moving on to behavior, fate, and transport. Check my time here. Really, a lot of the concern here is with regard to biosolids. Land application biosolids has been an amazing way to use and recycle our solids after wastewater treatment. We've got some wonderful programs in this area, great beneficial reuse in many cases, but of course there is concern with the biosolids and the concentration of PFAS and the potential release of PFAS. So we have a few projects looking at this. Some of them many of them wrapping up. Fourth one down, assessing poly and PFAS release from finished biosolids is actually in publication and I think should be out very quickly. There was also a webcast on that project recently at the end of 2021 that is available on our website for those of you that are interested. But I also want to talk about occurrence of PFAS in U.S. wastewater treatment plants. This project here, which should also be wrapping up next year, just had amazing participation. We've got over 30 facilities that we were able to look at with this project. Kind of like that analytical method project that I talked about. This particular slide was in that webcast I mentioned from late last year. We did look at both the measurable PFAS as well as, in this case, total oxidizable precursors that could eventually transform and become PFAS. And so this particular slide really shows you what we could measure with our target analytes in the kind of salmon and green color versus this TOP or total oxidizable precursor content in the teal and purple. And in all cases, you see just a fraction. In general, I will say that the concentrations of biosolids among all of those studied, they really were pretty equal. This project that I mentioned had the webcast and touched on the current project as well, because they're both being done by Charles Schaefer of CDM Smith. It involved 7 different facilities and a study that did about 6 months worth of. So the PFAS levels, again, among all the biosolids studies were very similar. The majority of the organic fluorine associated with precursors was not currently quantified in commercial laboratories. That's what I was showing you there with the top assay versus the measured analytes. The precursor transformation to perfluorinated carboxylates likely occurs during land application of the biosolids. So they did find, although they used a mesocosm approach that could have kind of represented some worst case scenario, they did find release and transformation on the 6 months of the study. But what I think is really important to highlight here is that the extent to which the release of PFAS poses a risk needs a lot more research, further assessment. Again, this report should be coming out very soon, and I know a lot of and this issue with biosolids really underscores why we're funding, or why we funded rather, the next 2 projects that I'll just highlight very quickly. One of which is understanding pyrolysis for PFAS removal. So here we're looking at the feasibility of full-scale thermal drying and pyrolysis to remove or destroy PFAS. It seems to have great promise there. This work is being done by Hazen and Sawyer. And then we're also looking at incineration of PFAS through sewage sludge incinerators. So this project is not quite as far along, so still a couple of years out before we have these results. But really want to see if we're able to. So I mentioned when I started, and I know I'm getting short on time here, that I wanted to talk about risk communication, and I am in just a second. But the last thing I want to mention here is that I think we all recognize that we really don't want to see these compounds in our water in the first place, right? It is not. We understand that the regulations are looking at water, but this is not simply an issue for utilities. Ideally, we would look at ways to prevent PFAS from entering our water supplies in the first place, rather than having to focus on removal. And that's what this project here is looking at. Can we look at some of the non-point sources in commercial, institutional, and other sectors as a way of maybe managing PFAS and mitigating their. Okay, so this just advanced without me again, my apologies. But lastly, I'll focus on risk communication messaging for sector professionals. This project is one that we funded last year. It's a pretty quick turnaround project. The idea here was to develop materials that utilities could use with their customers. We did this in anticipation of UCMR 5. So it is focused, it has a UCMR 5 toolkit as well as a OneWater toolkit. Now, I received the question already this morning about, how, to what extent was this going to be able to address some of the new challenges with the lower health advisory levels. And in reality, those just came out. This project is nearly complete. Researchers are meeting, and the researchers are all of those that you see at the bottom, led by American Water. We're going to be meeting with AWWA and next week to kind of talk about that, but we're hoping to release toolkits immediately following that. So, maybe some more work to be done in this area. But I will quickly highlight that
Alice, we have about 2 minutes left.
Perfect. Thank you so much. They did do some surveys of their customers, they being American Water, to see what their main concerns were, what they would like to see answered for them, and you see the responses here. And so this really informed the materials that were developed. You can get a preview here of some of what will be included in the toolkit, some frequently asked questions, bill inserts. We've got some graphics that people will be able to download and use. But utilities are going to need to customize this, obviously, for their own uses. So something to look forward to potentially as early as 2 weeks from now. So with that, I'll just thank you all again for the opportunity to share this with you. My contact information is here, and I'll open the floor for a minute or two of questions.
Actually, we're going to go ahead to Rosa, and if anyone has questions, please enter them in the chat box. And then after Rosa's talk, if there's time left in the session, our question and answer moderator will pull those and pose them to either Alice or Rosa. So if you have questions, put them in the chat. And with that, we'll let Rosa have the floor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christina.
Thank you for joining us, Alice.
Terrific. Let's see. Let's see there. Okay. How's that for the group?
That looks great.
Okay. Yeah, it's a little weird on my screens. So I am actually going to talk a little bit about other than destructive technologies, just to set the stage for the group to think conceptually about treatment of PFAS at any particular project site that you might have a concern about. So let's just go ahead and get started. Let me see, I have a little thing here that might be obstructing view. So I'm going to touch briefly on PFAS in the OneWater cycle. We've heard about it plenty today. I don't know that I will not have any big reveals for this group on that topic, but that helps us set the stage to move into the question of treatment approaches. I recognize that today's call has a lot of folks who are interested in potable water treatment, biosolids, but I actually come from a background of remediation, and I think that there's a lot of concern in the Potomac River Basin for sites that have groundwater or surface water problems that continue to contribute to the overall burden. So we'll talk about that, then we'll get on to the separation technologies and destruction technologies. And I don't intend to endorse any one particular technology. I really want to be in the spirit of this organization where we're just sharing information. And certainly anybody who has a specific need should get consulting support on their specific problem. So let's see, here we go. So let's just briefly revisit a slide that Zach shared right at the very beginning and talk a little bit about the Pfas sources that you should be thinking, and I know Alice just mentioned that, as did some others. You should be thinking about source control, right? It's great to nip things in the bud. So not an area that we're here that is heavy with manufacturing, but don't forget that there's post-manufacturing. It's not just the chemical producers, it's people who are using those products. Let me put it that way. And of course, this consumer products make their way into our households. Our households might clean a carpet or something. That water goes down the commode. That water can then enter into the ecosystem And of course, we've heard a lot about landfills and airfields, whether they're DOD or commercial airfields. Most of the small ones didn't have AFFF. So those would be some sources. And then, of course, we think about the impact from those sources, and that's another point of interceding to break this cycle here. So, you know, we see water coming into private wells. That also goes into the commode, might go into a septic field, might go into a wastewater treatment plant that could discharge to surface water. And the PFAS are going to be altered by that wastewater treatment, which you just heard Alice touch on just ever so briefly. Biosolids application for agricultural beneficial reuse have raised a lot of concern. And there is a lot of studies out regarding what's going on with PFAS in the wastewater treatment plant, but also what's going on with plant uptake. And of course, there's animal uptake as well, perhaps from irrigation water or whatever. And there's a lot of study in other countries actually about PFAS and the food sources. So that was a real quick overview because I want to get quickly into the technology portion of this. And I wanted to share the screen specifically because um, uh, we have to be talking about commercially viable treatment technologies. So there's a terrific amount of research being done into research technologies, starting at these very basic principle levels, bench scale, lab scale, some validation in the lab. But really what we're after, what's really the golden ring here, are actual systems, destructive systems in our case, that's been proven or demonstrated through a successful operation. And this TRL, this technology readiness level, is not new to the universe, but I do want to give a tip of the hat to NASA, which is where I found this definition of TRLs. We're not putting a human being on Mars, but we are trying to solve a pretty tricky problem. So that's what we're after, this actual system proven through successful operations. So it helps to just kind of assemble our thoughts around this. And we spoke a little bit about ex situ and in situ treatment. In situ is really geared more towards these environmental concerns. And then also I've shared in this matrix, you know, separation technologies and destruction technologies, right? So we just sorted these around here. And then one last notation here is that the bold or large bold font, those are technology readiness level 9s. Those are commercially feasible treatment technologies for PFAS. And you can see it's a rather lonely place in the destruction quadrant for commercially available. And we will talk a little bit about incineration a little bit more. So the destruction technologies are definitely all still in development. I was happy to see that some people thought that that might be an important area for us to work on. Now, I'm not going to have a chance to talk about all of these in great detail, but I do want to take the opportunity to build a picture for how one might combine technologies. We have to think about a treatment train, okay? So you have on this chart technologies that are probably familiar to a bunch of people on this call, things that you're using. And let's see how maybe we can put this all together for something kind of good, right? So let me take a moment. I'm a visual person. You know, forgive me if this is kindergarten for other people, but imagine, if you will, a PFAS laden waste stream, liquid waste stream in this case, being treated with granular activated carbon. And we heard just a few minutes ago about some of the challenges in the universe for capturing short chain compounds and some of the inadequacies of GAC, right? So GAC can certainly grab onto some of the bad actors that we're concerned with. It's not terribly efficient, and it's not 100% efficient in doing that. And then that GAC itself, with the PFAS and all the other things, the metals and the solids and, you know, all the other stuff that's in your wastewater that cloms onto the GAC, and by the way, keeps the PFAS from glomming on, that just can go into some sort of waste disposal mode, one of which could be destruction, right? You could also have these large GAC applications, let's say, or even small, where you use them and then you reactivate them. You basically heat them up to drive off those compounds that are problematic, and then you can reuse that. Certainly not in a potable application, right? But in maybe an industrial or a remediation application, right? So what you're seeing though is we don't have any really perfect method. Oh, and by the way, the little graphic at the bottom um, is it shows as clean water, but let's all agree that that's a waste stream that's below the required limits or reportable limits or detectable limits, whatever the definition is for your site. All right, so we have a place where we could plug in to a granular activated carbon application, possibly, right? Especially with this waste disposal or destruction step. Now let's look at ion exchange resins, which can be designed to be more sophisticated in their ability to extract different kinds of PFAS from this same waste stream. They have a different sorption mechanism, and they can do a good job grabbing those tails and heads of the different PFAS. Still not great with the short chains, but definitely a better situation. You calibrate your resins to do a nice job for you. And you might have a single-use resin, maybe in an application for drinking water. And guess what? It does what that GAC description does. Those resins have to be disposed of in some fashion once they're used, if it's a single-use resin. Or there's some regenerable resins. Now, again, you can regenerate this sorptive technology, create the regenerated resin, and then reuse it, but you cannot use it for a potable application. I just wanted to reiterate that. So we would be interested in doing that. A lot of the regeneration sometimes involves methanol and some unusual salts. And so, you know, it creates a situation where you're not going to be using that for potable, but you could use it for other applications, right? And then you can regenerate. And by the way, I'm going to step back a little bit. Anybody who's on this phone call is probably pretty interested in sustainability and renewability, right? And so having materials that are supposed to make the environment clean going into a landfill or going to an incinerator can cause for me some consternation, right? So let's focus on that recycling renewable use. Okay, so but the other nice thing from the regenerated resin is that it creates a concentrated waste that you might be able to dispose of or treat, and you can treat it more efficiently because it's concentrated. If you could pull a PFAS specific destruction technology that attacks this concentrated waste, that would be great. But there are other things in this waste, unlike some of the things I'm going to show you in a little bit. Again, we can concentrate PFAS using reverse osmosis or nanofiltration. It's also non-selective. You're going to pull out the PFAS, you're going to pull out a whole bunch of other things, and that concentrated waste is going to be sort of a complicated soup of mixtures. And again, you can either dispose of it or destroy that. So, I hope you're along for the ride with me here. I'm starting to zero in on these concentrated wastes, if you hadn't noticed. So now let's talk about something that can concentrate selectively for PFAS. And by the way, everything I've mentioned up to now is commercially available, and so is foam fractionation. And there are different kinds of foam fractionation, but for PFAS removal, they take advantage of the characteristic of some PFAS, not all, but some PFAS to cling to contact surfaces like the air-water interface formed by a bubble, right? So you form bubbles through foam fractionation. The PFAS cling to those bubbles. The bubbles float to the top. It's like a delicious foam on the head of beer. You scrape that off, and it's your concentrated PFAS waste. It's very exciting because the concentrating can be extremely effective. I should have mentioned with RO, you get maybe a 20 times concentration. If you're starting with 70 parts per trillion, I would say whoop-de-doo to go to 20 times that. That's not concentrated. That's just still super low concentration. Foam fractionation is going to be pulling off highly concentrated PFAS waste. And they are getting better at removing short chains in the foam fractionation. Ultra short chains, I don't know that anybody's been able to skin that cat. Right. So this is getting to be a little bit more exciting because we have a PFAS only concentrated waste, right? Because we're smart enough to treat all these other things. We've done that for decades in water treatment. We've treated all these other characters that are, floating along in these water or liquid waste streams. But the PFAS are the thing that are causing us a problem. So if we separate them out and give them their own solution, we're doing something for ourselves. Okay, so now let me talk to you about something that it is commercially available, and that is novel sorbents that select only PFAS. It's the only thing they care about. In fact, they're calibrated to hold a PFAS molecule and pull it out, extract it uh, from the waste stream. And so they're selective. The nice thing about these that is so terrific is that many of these novel sorbents are organically based. They're made from cornstarch or cyclodextrins, right? Just sort of biodegradable compounds. Let's put it that way, right? So, and the other really exciting thing is that there are some novel sorbents that can be regenerated, meaning you can, and I'll go through the path for you guys. You get that waste stream coming in, you got the novel sorbent sitting in there, those little PFAS stick into those little cups that are created. You regenerate it, it spits out the PFAS only waste, right? Because it only picked up PFAS. And you can reuse that. And the other interesting news for this group is there is an organization, a company, for-profit company that makes a novel sorbent that has been approved for potable water use. Comes to your house. You would use it in one of your filters in your house, different size. You can use it till it's spent, and you can take it out. You put it in a package. You send it back to the company. They do the regeneration, and they take that novel sorbent and then use it in an industrial application. Single use for potable, multiple use if you can use it elsewhere. So now I think you're getting with me here. We're reducing the waste, right? Because we're not just throwing away the media, and we're concentrating for PFAS only, so we can look for the sledgehammer that kills the PFAS and not waste energy on other things, right? So that's exactly what this graphic is showing you. You have a concentrating technology, brings the PFAS in from the waste stream. I should have shown that on the left, but I think you all have seen it now. You have a clean water waste stream, concentrated PFAS. You have to do something with that, right? And so the EPA has a draft guidance that says, look, right now it looks like viable technologies for PFAS wastes are to landfill them, put them in deep well injection, which a lot of people don't like to do, but people do, or incinerate. And incineration is a PFAS destructive technology that many people use, and you could use it on that concentrated waste. You apply energy, terrific amount of heat, and then you get a non-hazardous, PFAS-free byproduct, whatever that might be. Now, those may have some portion that still need to go into a landfill or otherwise are disposed of. I'm not a complete, I'm not completely naive in this respect, but I do like the notion of this. So what are we doing? We're looking for commercial destruction technologies and developing PFAS destruction technologies. So what do we need to learn in order to fill that gap? What we need to do as a community is understand what we mean by PFAS destruction. And luckily for us, the DoD has engaged a group to define what that means. So before I show up at your door and say, I have a destructive technology, you have in your hand this nice little checklist where you can say, yeah, but Rosa, do you do this? Do you do this? So you don't get into a pickle, right? So we have to have technologies that can demonstrate a decrease in PFAS concentrations. Gee, that seems so groundbreaking. No, we all understand that. But it's complicated because remember, we have thousands of PFAS. We have precursors. We have precursors that will convert into the perfluorinated compounds that we can measure. So you might not measure them, and then you destroy the precursors and you make more of the regulated perfluorinated compounds, right? So you need to understand how your PFAS chemistry is changing during the destruction process? What is the transformation? What are you measuring? And have you lost anything? So did somebody tell you that they were destroying PFAS and it ended up that they just accidentally piled it up on a filter and they just never measured the filter? Right? Because they thought, oh, well, I'm destroying it, so I'm not going to measure the filter. Right? So you actually have to think about where in this process do we have the opportunity for resorption, transfer, volatilization, even though they're not very volatile, and dilution, certainly. I mean, so then we also need to go back to that technology readiness level pile up that I shared and recognize we have to be using a mechanism that has been demonstrated to be scientifically valid, starting it to the bench scale where the mechanism is understood. It is not voodoo, it has to be science. Okay, so that's good because there's a lot of people doing research on that. Don't settle for somebody's word for it. Hey, trust me, you know, we know it has a mechanism that works. You want to see a peer-reviewed article associated with that so that the collective genius has had a chance to say, did you think of whatever, right? I mentioned this transformation. We also want to look and see that when the mechanism is occurring, do we see these intermediate compounds forming? Are you seeing what you expect based on the mechanism? And are you making fluoride, right? Because isn't the goal to pull all those fluorines off the PFAS chains? Yes, it is. And so you would like to get a fluorine balance. That's what you really want to do. You want to know that you're taking long chains and precursors and making them shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. We don't think the short chains are as bad for us, but that's why I said toxicity is probably the one most important thing we need to understand. Like, how low do we need to go? How short do we have to get? And we need to understand mass balance of fluorine. Okay, so if you're going to buy a destructive technology, caveat emptor, have this checklist in hand. So I mentioned thermal, and I think incineration is familiar to a lot of people. And incinerators and cement kilns, not just in the United States, but all over the globe, indeed, have been used for PFAS-related waste. And the EPA guidance that I mentioned earlier listed as a viable disposal mechanism. What's also nice is you can put solids or liquids. You can burn water in an incinerator if that's what you really need to do. You can send your stuff off, or you can build a facility at your site. Here's the rub. It's not clear what's happening inside the incinerator isn't transforming our known PFAS into immeasurable PFAS that could be just as bad for us, but we don't know how to measure them, so we think they're zero, right? That is not mass balance, that is merely transformation. And as a consequence, the Department of Defense has been told no more incineration of any PFAS, right? We think those might be going out of the stack. Let's pump the brakes on that and get a better method. It does lead in the short term to more landfilling, that's for sure. Okay, so who's funding besides WRF, which we heard earlier, doing some fabulous work? Who's just funding this destruction technology development? So the big piles of money are coming in from the Department of Defense. After all, they have a hugely vested interest in getting across this, and the US EPA, whom we heard from earlier. So I thought, why not share with the group technologies that both DoD and EPA have identified as being the highest potential, the closest to technology readiness level 9 that I mentioned earlier. And so I've listed a handful of them there. I'm just going to tell you the PFAS innovation team, treatment team, they have fact sheets on these 4 methodologies for destructive treatment. And they do say the jury's still out on some of these remaining questions if you'd like to learn more about it. And the DoD is funding, and I selectively pick the ones that are further along. So they're in this so-called ESTCP program, and we're going to talk about a couple of those. And the first one we're going to talk about is supercritical water oxidation, affectionately known as SCWO. And what SCWO is a method to take a liquid waste, raising water above its critical point, 374 degrees centigrade and 221 bars of pressure, and then water turns into some other weird form. It's not water, it's not ice, it's not steam, it's supercritical water. And it has the ability, when you add air, to oxidize everything in its presence. It's just you know, but you can imagine to achieve those pressures, especially on very large volumes, can be quite difficult. In fact, achieving high temperatures and pressures can actually be quite dangerous, right? So you don't want to blow yourself up, and that's what a lot of people are working on for the technology. And there's a couple of systems that are in mobile units or in kind of skid-mounted units that you can try at your project site. And the nice thing about SCWO is it works on liquids and solids. It's terrific. And in fact, there's some SCWO methods that are looking at taking the inherent energy in biosolids, so it's not as much of an energy hog. Because really, the downsides of SCWO are that there's a high energy input. They can get fouled or plugged with the strange things that you create. And we haven't seen a fluorine mass balance for SCWO. Electrochemical oxidation is another technology that is recognized by both the US EPA and the DoD as being fairly far along, maybe just like SCWO in the TRL 8 category. It does exactly what this says, destroys PFAS sequentially, blink, 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 taking off those fluorines. It achieves a high degree of reductions of targeted PFAS, and it does it by moving electrons between a cathode and an anode. It's actually kind of the reverse of a battery. You're putting the power into that, and that creates an oxidative state that then can strip the fluorines off of those compounds because there's sufficient energy. There are a few field demonstrations out there. It's been through the demonstration phase, so we know both SCWO and EO both work, and there are systems out there that you could look at to see how they might work for you. Liquid waste only, right? Now, plasma is something I know a little bit less about, but again,
2 minutes left, Rosa. 2 minutes.
That's perfect. So it has the other same characteristics as the others that I've mentioned, and that is that there are some mobile units out there trying to get to that elusive commercial scale, but right there on the brink of it. And again, it is taking advantage of creating highly reactive oxidizing species by putting a ton of energy into the material. And it's not great if you have dilute PFAS, but I just told you guys that these things can be more efficient if you have a concentrated PFAS waste that is separated from your other waste streams, right? So, yeah. So you might use SAF, you might use that foam fractionation, you might use those novel sorbents. That's what you might use in order to put those materials into the technologies that I just shared with you. And those are out and about, and you can test them. Now, I didn't talk about pyrolysis, and partly because I knew I wasn't going to have time. But I think we can talk about that separately or later, or maybe talk amongst ourselves. But here's the takeaway. We need to get PFAS out of the cycle. Wherever we can leverage, where we can grab it, let's grab it. Absolutely positively protect the drinking water supplies. That's paramount. That's what the regs say. That's what your heart says. That's what you got to do. Look at better methods than just these sorption methods. We need better methods. We need to understand them better, and we need to be able to feed the PFAS into a destructive technology. So I'm going to stop there because maybe we could squeeze in a question or two, and hopefully that's been helpful for the group. Thank you so much.